Welcome back to the Badass Literature Society, where badasses come together to rate and review novels recommended by you. I'm Michael.
I'm Lauren.
And this is Barbara.
And we're back. I'll let Barbara explain.
Oh, thanks for putting me on the spot. No, we were just busy. January and February with moving and personal stuff.
Yep. Barbara and I moved, so it put a delay in the podcast, but now we're back.
And then you guys took forever to read this book. I'm just going to put that out there.
It's also true. Lauren and I did take longer to read this one than we normally do.
Michael took longer than me.
Yeah.
Back to our scheduled programming. Our podcasts are published monthly. At least that's our goal for now.
Lies.
Hopefully that will be our goal going forward. We split the podcast into two sections, a spoiler-free description and our overall score, and then a more in-depth discussion of the plot and the ending, which is obviously spoiler-heavy, and then our individual scores for the book. But first, let's talk about the author. I guess we should first talk about the title of the book.
Yeah.
This month is Next Year in Havana.
No.
By Chanel Cleedon. This book was picked by one of our listeners.
Whoop whoop, shout out.
Shout out to Miss Carly. So the author's brief bio, Chanel Cleedon. She has written a number of contemporary romance novels, along with Next Year in Havana, When We Left Cuba, and The Last Train to Key West. She's a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author. And her books, Next Year in Havana and When We Left Cuba, were both in Reese Witherspoon's book club picks. Her family left Cuba during the Cuban Revolution, and so that's kind of cool because the book is semi-biographical. Now, Barbara?
This book came out on February 6th of 2018. It was Reese Witherspoon's pick for her book club in July of 2018. It has a 3.94 rating out of 5 on Goodreads. It has over 20 editions, including editions in Spanish, Portuguese, Japanese, and German. It was nominated for Goodreads Choice Awards for Historical Fiction in 2018. I believe it has 400 pages. And the genre is listed as romance and fiction, although, once again, Goodreads listed it as a historical fiction. Not quite sure how that works, but there it is.
Fair enough. Now, Lauren, let us know what's on the jacket cover.
All right. The brief synopsis on the jacket cover is as follows. After the death of her beloved grandmother, a Cuban-American woman travels to Havana, where she discovers the roots of her identity and unearths a family secret hidden since the revolution. Havana, 1958. The daughter of a sugar baron, 19-year-old Elisa Perez is part of Cuba's high society, where she is largely sheltered from the country's growing political unrest, until she embarks on a clandestine affair with a passionate revolutionary. Miami, 2017. Freelance writer Marisol Ferreira grew up hearing romantic stories of Cuba from her late grandmother, Elisa, who was forced to flee with her family during the revolution. Elisa's last wish was for Marisol to scatter her ashes in the country of her birth. Arriving in Havana, Marisol comes face to face with the contrast of Cuba's tropical, timeless beauty and its perilous political climate. When more family history comes to light and Marisol finds herself attracted to a man with secrets of his own, she'll need the lessons of her grandmother's past to help her understand the true meaning of courage.
It's a pretty good jacket cover. Nice little description, a little synopsis. Mm-hmm. So let's dive in to the first half of our podcast. Obviously, this is the spoiler-free part. And as you guys know, the first question we always ask is, what did you guys think about Next Year in Havana? And remember, no spoilers.
Okay, I don't think this is spoiling it. So I like the historical aspect of it. I love the getting to know Cuba, and while reading the book, I would Google stuff to make sure that's really what happened, and to figure out who people were, because I don't really know much about Cuban history, I'm not going to lie. But I did not care for the romance part. I don't like romance though, so that's probably why, but I just feel like it's so cheesy. But that's just me. But I liked everything else about it.
The fact that the romance was, also just not appropriate to me. I don't know, you're going after a married guy. Really?
Spoilers.
Oh shit.
All right, Lauren ruined the entire. No, I'm just kidding. That actually is not that big of a spoiler, but it's fun to give everybody a hard time.
I apologize. No, I thought the book was okay. I liked the back and forth between the perspectives. I always like books like that. I shouldn't say always. I don't like it when there's like 10 people that you have to keep track of, like the first book
Into
that we
the water.
like Into the Water. But I like it. I do enjoy it when it's 2, 3, 4 people that you can easily track. So I liked that aspect. I also liked the historical aspect. Um, I didn't mind the romance with the exception of spoilers that I can't talk about now. Um, but I don't know. It wasn't like my favorite book, but it wasn't like the worst book either. So
That's fair. So I came into this one
Dreading.
fair point that yeah, I was dreading this one. I did not really want to read it. When Carly recommended it, I was like, oh man, it's gonna be like a romance book. I really don't want to read this, and I actually really enjoyed it. The romance stuff, it's a little cheesy, it's a little cliche. Nothing wrong with a little cheese every now and then, though. It was good. The juxtaposition between Cuba during the Revolution and modern Cuba was also really cool.
Yeah, I like that.
I really enjoyed the historical accuracy and the. I mean, you could just tell that the author put a lot of time into her research on the Cuban Revolution and the time period that happened, and then it was also really cool to find out later that the author's family actually went through some of this stuff.
Correct.
Not not the exact story, but they were there during this time, and so she's got some personal experience with this, which I thought was really cool. And obviously adds a whole nother dimension to the book when she's writing about stuff that's happened in her own life or in her own family's life.
Well, I feel like the experience, I wasn't sure if she visited Cuba since the ban was lifted and stuff like that, but like when she was writing that scene, I feel like that's how someone would feel, like coming from a culture that's your culture, but you've never experienced it because you couldn't before, as far as being in, soil from home type thing versus like living in Florida and growing up in the Cuban, communities and stuff like that versus actually being in Cuba and experiencing it firsthand. So I enjoyed that part, but one of the romances I could stomach much better than the other one. I'm curious to know if that's different for anyone else.
But we'll have to get to that in the second half.
I mean, in the book, it's pretty obvious. In the back cover, it says like she meets a person. So I preferred the grandma, which is Elisa, romance story versus Mary Saul.
I did too, but there were still things that I didn't like about that one either that we'll get to later.
We'll get there. For those of you sticking around for the second half, we'll get there.
But yeah, I preferred one versus the other. I thought the other one's better written. I think the other one was a little too, like, within a week you're falling in love with someone. Come on, that's not realistic. It didn't feel as realistic.
That's the cheese I was talking about, Barbara.
That's not real life, and that's why it's not realistic. The other one made, like, it was more, like I said, I could stomach it better just because I felt like it wasn't realistic. I mean, it might be, I don't know, but it was more.
One of them was like a nice Gouda, and the other one was like a American slice in plastic wrap.
See? Yeah, I mean, that's a little rough. A little rough. I'm going to go out on a limb and make the assumption that people who like reading romance don't necessarily like reading real life stuff. I mean, a lot of romance and entertainment is not as realistic.
I would argue that because I enjoy reading romance occasionally. Like, it's not my first pick, but I read a lot more romance than you guys do. And I prefer the ones that are more realistic than the ones that are super far-fetched. But
the whirlwind romance.
Right.
So those out there, we all grew up on Disney movies. And Disney movies are all whirlwind
That
romances.
doesn't mean they're realistic.
No, absolutely they're not. It's full of cheese.
Made fun of itself on that one alone.
We're getting off track a little bit. So what we could talk about, since we can't talk in specifics about these romances that I can tell you're both super eager to discuss, We could talk about the historical fiction side of this because that would not be full of spoilers.
No,
because
you
it
can literally
happened.
Google.
It happened. You know, so
I don't remember studying anything about Cuba in school, but I also don't remember a lot about history because me. But I don't know if you guys remember anything at all. Like
No,
I had to Google who obviously I know the main baddie. Like that's it feels weird calling Fidel Castro the main baddie of the book. But like I knew who he was, obviously, but the other people that they mentioned, like I had no idea who they were. Is it
Che Guevara?
Yeah, like I knew the name, but I couldn't remember like why he was important, if that makes sense.
So to answer your first question about like learning that in school, we did not. I mean, I learned more about the Cuban Revolution, I think, in this book, and then my research that I did because of this book that I remember learning in school. We learned about, you know, like the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bay of Pigs and all that stuff that's more American-centered, I guess I'll say, than the actual Cuban Revolution. So that was kind of fun to learn about that. I love history, so that's truly what saved this book for me. I think if it had been the story that it is, the romance story that it is in a different setting, it wasn't as exciting.
But it wouldn't have worked because the book was about the Cuban heritage.
If it had been a purely fictional romance book set between fictional revolutionaries in a fairy kingdom, I would have hated it. But I liked it because of the historical background. That's all I was getting at with that.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, American history classes don't really teach about other countries that don't, like you said, like they teach the American-centered stuff. Like I remember, like Michael said, learning about the missile crisis and all of that, but not about any conflicts like within their own culture.
What I liked about it was getting a perspective of the non-American side of it. You know, like the Cuban perspective, because to Americans it was like, oh, you know, we came in, saved the day type thing, like you're welcome. But to them it's like, you know, it's they don't see it that way, or they didn't view it that way. And at first they thought Castro was going to be amazing because he was going to take over and fix their country and all that stuff. And obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, the book gave the impression that he started off okay, and then it didn't go well from that because it didn't fix anything. So I liked to see that. Do what?
It sounds like most political leaders.
Right. Yeah, good intentions originally doesn't come out that way, but I did enjoy seeing that because I like seeing different perspectives of that, you know, to change how you see things. So maybe you can be like next time, be like, oh, okay, you know, it might not have just happened this way, you know, to a Cuban person seeing it that way, you know, it was a good thing in the beginning. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
And getting that point of view as well, especially from the Cuban side, from the whenever this happened, the
Cuban Revolution?
Yeah, I don't know when that actually happened, versus like the 2017 Cuban that they that she described for
the late 50s, early 60s when all that happened.
So I like the two different time periods as well. I enjoyed that from the book.
Yeah, the juxtaposition between the two is cool, and I mean she did a really good job at showing how between 1958 and 2017, I think 2017 was when the book was written. The two time periods were obviously like hugely different. Like if you think about it, in America between 1958 and 2017, it's like whoa, totally different. But you pointed out the similarities in Cuban culture between then and now, as well as the huge differences and kind of the growth that's happened, but also the stagnation in some aspects of life there. And that's what I really like about historical fiction in general, not just this book, but the genre, is that it gives the author and the reader a really unique perspective on a historical situation. And while it may not be entirely, you know, nonfiction, I personally find historical fiction a lot easier to digest than like reading a purely nonfiction book. I read those too, I enjoy them, but it's fun to see historical things from like a fictional civilian's perspective. I think that's really, to me anyway, that's really cool. And that was one of the things I think that the author did really well in this book. And getting to see kind of almost a shared perspective between grandmother and granddaughter in totally different generations of similar events was really cool. It was really well written.
Yeah, agreed. Well, moving on.
So, as you guys know, we don't go into our individual ratings in the first half of the podcast, but we are going to talk about our group rating. Our group rating for this one ended up being right at a 6.5 out of 10 on average, which you could say pretty much goes in line with what we were talking about earlier, that we liked it but didn't love it. It was an enjoyable book. Next question we always ask is, would you recommend the book? And if you would recommend it, who would you recommend it to? So, Lauren, let's start with you. Would you recommend Next Year in Havana?
Yeah, I mean, I have quite a few people that I know that read romance novels, but even to them, I don't know that this would be a recommendation because it's not like a chick lit romance novel. So I wouldn't recommend it to like the diehard romance people because I think they might be put off by the things that I liked about it, which were the historical aspect and some of that. But I mean, I would recommend it to people that like some of multiple genres, I guess. I mean, I would tell them that what my opinions are on it and what I liked and didn't like, but I think I would recommend it to certain audiences.
Fair enough. Barbara?
Yeah, I would recommend it to some of my friends. I mean, I have a lot of friends who don't read the same books as I do. I think they definitely would like this one because they like the romance aspect of books, but I think they also like the historical aspect and stuff like that. I mean, I would recommend this over Elantris to most of my friends, personally, just because most of my friends fall in the other side of the category. Like, they don't like heavy fantasy books. I wouldn't have a problem recommending it, especially if I knew someone who likes historical side, because I think she did that very well. And if you can ignore, and if you like the romance, maybe they like that. I don't really know. I don't read that kind of books, those types of books normally, so I don't know where this falls in the romance category, I should say. So I wouldn't recommend it just solely based on that, but yeah, I would definitely recommend it. I didn't have an issue with it.
My answer is not going to be surprising in that it is also yes, I would recommend it. It was a good book.
To all your guy friends.
I came in with super low expectations for this one because, to be honest, I mean, if you were to get on the internet right now and Google the cover, it looks like most covers do for, as Lauren called it, like the chick lit kind of books,
well,
like
it's
the
categorized
romance.
as romance. It's not even categorized as historical fiction.
And I would say that I went into this book thinking it was going to be a romance book with a little bit of history, and it ended up being a historical fiction book with a little bit of romance. And so, I did. I enjoyed it. I would recommend it. I think the book has a broad appeal in the sense that people who like historical fiction would like the book. They could tolerate the romance like I did. People who like romance books are going to get a side of historical fiction, and maybe they'll find that history interesting. I think it has a broad appeal, and the message that it tells that we'll get into in the second half about revolution and, the both pros, cons, pitfalls, happy times, all that stuff about all that it's an important thing to read about too. So yeah, I would recommend it to most anybody, unless you came to me and just said, Michael, I can't read books that have any romance or love in them at all. In which case, you're a sad person, because all the best books have all the books have something, in that. But that'd be the only person I wouldn't recommend it to. But otherwise, I would recommend the book.
You shouldn't really have friends that are heartless anyway.
It's true.
You don't want that kind of negativity.
For the friends I'm referring to, if you're listening, get it together. Get it together. So, now that you know our group score, and you know that all three of us would recommend it, if you're stopping at this point, safely you can go out there and probably get this book, read it, and enjoy it. And if you do, we'd love to hear from you. For those of you leaving us, don't forget to give us a rating if you like this podcast, and follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Our handle is @BadassLitPod. We want to hear from you. If you've got a book you want us to read, let us know. If you read this book because of us, let us know. If you read this book because we told you to read it and you hated it, let us know. We want to know all of it. reach out to us, talk to us. Now,
tell your friends about us and your family.
Tell your friends and your family and your coworkers and your dogs.
I guess. We might be soothing to dogs.
Tell your dogs. Yeah, that's important. Now, Lauren is going to give us a short preview of our next book, which is Magic for Liars, and it's her pick.
All right. Magic for Liars is by Sarah Gailey, and the jacket cover for that is as follows. Ivy Gamble has never wanted to be magic. She's perfectly happy with her life. She has an almost sustainable career as a private investigator in an empty apartment and a slight drinking problem. It's a great life, and she doesn't wish she was like her estranged sister, the magically gifted Professor Tabitha. But when Ivy is hired to investigate the gruesome murder of a faculty member at Tabitha's private academy, the stalwart detective starts to lose herself in the case, the life she could have had, and the answer to the mystery that seems just out of reach.
Dun, dun, dun. I won't lie, I actually am excited for this one. It sounds really interesting.
I already started it. It's good.
Yeah, I did too.
I haven't, so...
For shame.
Now, remember, if you're still here, the second part of our podcast is an in-depth look at the book. So if you want to read it and you don't want it to be spoiled, stop listening now and come back when you're done. If you're still here, you're about to get it spoiled for you. But for those of you sticking around for the spoilers, here we go.
Diving in.
Let's dive in. Yes. Now, for those of you sticking around for the spoilers, here we go. Normally, I would start this off with some questions to try to get things going, but I think Barbara and Lauren are both really excited to talk about the spoilery romance stuff that Lauren literally spoiled in the first half, almost, kind of, sort of.
Spoiling.
Sorry.
Louise is a married man. That's what she's been wanting to say.
Yeah, but
I said it, though. I took it from her. I took the spoiler.
Yeah, but technically he's not.
But he is. She is introduced as his wife, and they are married.
No, they're divorced. They were divorced. They used to be married, but they were divorced. She just stuck around because, Cuba kind of sucked and she didn't have any means of living.
For the whole first half of the book, though, she's referred to as Luis's wife. Not ex-wife. Not ex-wife.
By her. By her, though, not by him.
It's true. That is all the way that Marisol sees it. She thinks that he's married.
Correct.
Which is why she's...
That's what I'm
resisting his sultry advances.
But she still goes for him and lets herself fall in love with him when she is under the impression that he's a married man.
Well, yeah. Is that the biggest qualm you have with it? The whole romance?
I just don't think it... I think it's stupid, too. He's my tour guide, and now he's gonna just, literally in... You give me one tour of this place that I'm excited to be at, and now I'm in love with you, and...
Right.
It was really predictable. That part of the romance was really predictable.
I just felt like, if I'm not mistaken, the whole book from Marisol's point of view takes place a week and a half, 2... Because I think her vacation was for 2 weeks, but they technically didn't stay the full 2 weeks because of crap that happened later in the book.
I thought she stayed longer because of the crap that happened later in the book.
No, she cut her vacation short. She even griped about it later in the book. I didn't get the full chance to experience Cuba.
I think you're right. Their whole romance...
It was 2 weeks, not even.
A couple of weeks long. So it was just kind of... I liked her grandma's love story better.
Same.
Because... It was more genuine. It was more over time, and they wrote letters back and forth. I didn't like the way that he, let her believe that he was dead. That made me mad and sad.
Yeah.
I think he kind of had to. He thought he was doing what was best for her at the time.
Pretty much because her dad forced him to, because he went and visited her in Florida, and her dad was like, "Oh, she's married, leave her alone." So he did.
It's true. We're back to the 1950s and 60s now, people. If you haven't realized that we changed gears and are talking about the other couple.
Sorry.
Elisa and Pablo.
Escobar.
Yeah.
Not Pablo Escobar. This is not a Colombian drug story. This is it's a Cuban Revolution story.
Yeah, I like their romance better because I feel like it happened more organically and stuff like that. Like they got to know each other. They wrote little love notes to each other and stuff like that. Whereas for Marisol, it's like Lauren said, it's like, oh, we have this in common. Like we want a revolution for Cuba, but not really. And I just feel like realistically, I don't think they would end up together later if the book continued, because I just feel like they would butt heads too much. I didn't feel like it was realistic personally, but that's why I had an issue. I felt like it happened too quickly. And yeah, I get you can fall in love, but I feel like that's lust, not love. Personally, like you can fall in love with someone that quick, but that's not how you stay in a relationship, especially because he had to leave Cuba and he never wanted to. Like the whole book goes in like how she didn't feel comfortable having him leave, but he had to. I feel like I'm jumping the gun here, but
no, I had similar issues with it, and the only other issue I had was just the fact that even though he was divorced, she didn't know he was divorced, and so like why would you not ask about his wife, like when you're in those early stages, like.
Well, didn't she though? Like she did, because she was like, "Oh, I'm falling in love with him, but I can't because he's married." So finally, she asked him, like when they were having a drink, after he got like punched in the face or something like that. She was like,
That was way after she'd already like developed feelings and like let him.
But she didn't do anything with him prior to, so technically she didn't do anything wrong. You can have murderous thoughts about someone just because you don't act on it. You can't go to jail for it.
Okay, Barbara.
I'm just saying. If anyone out there has murderous intent, you're okay as long as you don't act upon it.
Right.
Michael, any?
I don't know. I
have a chicken in this horse race.
I'm not. Sure. I think like so. Both relationships were cheesy, obviously, in my opinion. The romance was cheesy in different ways, but you
didn't like the other one?
Can I finish my thought? That's what I'm going to talk about first.
I'm hurt.
The relationship and the development of the relationship between Elisa and Pablo in the 1950s and 60s was cheesy, but it was the feel-good. It was the feel-good kind of cheesy.
Explain to me how it was cheesy.
I'm trying.
Okay, I'll let you.
It was the feel-good kind of cheesy, where it's like, like you watch like a romantic comedy and you're like, this is so unbelievable, but it makes you happy, and that's what their relationship was. Like the way it was written, like like she's like, no, I like the class difference, and like I shouldn't love him. Like the cheesy tropes in romance made more sense and felt more realistic in theirs.
How would you know what the cheesy romance trope is if you don't even read those books?
I've read enough and heard enough jokes about them to know how awful they are.
That's not true. That's stereotypes. Yeah.
What I didn't like, to continue my own thought that they asked me to provide, what I didn't like about Marisol and Louise's relationship is like I don't know. I mean, I don't want to read like he brushed my arm and my body went ooh, like, and that's how that was written. The other one was a very cutely written relationship. Like she was talking about how like it was.
All the females who's listening to this are real pissed off because that's how most romance stories are. You're just a dude who doesn't understand that. I'm gonna just flat out say that.
I will sit here and openly admit that I'm a dude who doesn't read romance novels and doesn't understand that. I did not enjoy that aspect of the writing. That's me, my opinion. I think I'm allowed to have one.
The only thing that I feel like that could be classified as cheesy about the other relationship would only, I think, be classified as cheesy if you take out the time. So, like, the letter writing, like the love letters in today's day and age, that would be considered cheesy. But when you think about, like, the time period that they were in, that was relatively normal.
Right, it's not like they had cell phones or texting abilities, so it's not like they could do it
Whereas,
that way.
like, a book written in more current times, if they're sending love letters back and forth, it's a little bit more cheesy. But back then, I mean, that was their only means of communication.
Agreed. Yeah, I I don't know if I agree with you, Michael, on that. I mean, you're entitled to your opinions as much as they can be wrong.
Opinions can't be wrong, Barbara. That's why they're called opinions.
I know. I'm just giving you a hard time. I've read enough romance or books that had that's pretty, I feel like, normal or traditional for those types of books to have that, and I don't think they were overdone, personally. Like, I've unfortunately read crappier stuff that's like way over the top, and I thought this was at least tasteful. Like, it didn't go into details about like the two sex scenes. It wasn't in gross detail or anything like that. And no offense, I'm gonna start picking on dude books where you read a story or a book written by a dude, and it goes into like these details during those scenes. It's like, that's not realistic either.
Yeah.
Stephen King, looking at you.
I feel like it was relatively mild in the romantic description category.
Yeah, me too.
Compared to some romance novels that I've read that are very much more graphic.
Stephen King, looking at you.
Yeah, and I have never read, like, the Shades of Grey or whatever. I'm not talking about, like, that level of graphic. I'm just talking about, like, other novels that are fiction that would just fall into the chick lit romance category that have more descriptive stuff than this.
Yep. I mean, I'm pretty sure I've read young adult books that had more descriptive stuff, and I was like, oh, what the hell? But anyways, I guess that's our 2 cents on the romance stuff.
So, moving past the romance review, let's go over one of the questions that we've got. First one is, when Marisol arrives in Cuba, she struggles with identifying as Cuban because she grew up in the United States and because she's never set foot on Cuban soil. How much does a physical place define one's identity? How does Marisol's trip after her views about being Cuban and change her perception of herself? I'm going to ask the whole question, then we can kind of go over all this, what I was thinking. And are there stories and rituals handed down through the generations in your own family? So this was something that Barbara kind of touched on earlier, talking about how she felt like an exile almost in her own land. So I'm going to let Barbara answer this question first.
Well, which part of the question?
The first one. How much does a physical place define one's identity?
I think it's a huge thing. I coming from Brazil and immigrating to the U.S., I feel like I can relate a lot to this. It's funny, and there was a quote in the book, and I don't have the book here with me, that I had highlighted that I really liked, because that's how I felt. Being here in the U.S. and stuff like that, like, yes, it is home, but when I went back to Brazil after a really long time of not being there, I felt at home for once in my lifetime. I felt like I was home. I felt the same way like she described it in a book, and I wish I had that now. So I feel like a place really does define your identity. I mean, it's culture and how you do things, and like how I look at the world is different than how you guys would, just because of my experiences living in Brazil and then coming here and having that as a culture too. So I definitely related to that part of the book. I think that was probably my favorite part, was those beginning chapters, especially when she was on the plane describing like how she felt when she first landed in Cuba for the first time.
Yeah, having never lived anywhere besides the United States, with the exception of studying abroad, I feel like a physical place defines your identity to an extent, but even from like my perspective with you, Barbara, is like your family very much like keeps your culture alive, if that makes sense, like in America. And so I feel like as much as like being in Brazil or being in Cuba in this case is where like maybe she feels more at home, like wherever you are, like you kind of bring that culture with you. I guess not everybody does, but like some people do, and you can tell like it's an important part of who they are. Like they, keep the cooking and things like that traditional, or they speak their language, or they do the traditions. And so I think that as much as the physical place defines your identity to an extent, I also feel like it goes with you where you go.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good way to put it, Lauren. And I'm going to echo some of your thoughts in that I think that part of the book was more meaningful to me than it would have been if I didn't know Barbara, just because of stories that I've heard from you and from your family. And obviously that's not something that I went through personally, but it felt more meaningful because it's like some of the things that you and I have talked about you and your family kind of were mirrored almost in some of the experiences that Marisol described. And so I think that some of that had a deeper meaning than it would have otherwise, which was really cool. I mean, there was parts of the book where Marisol talked about, she didn't feel like she would be like she was a real Cuban because she had lived in America her whole life. And it was cool to kind of watch her character. I'm going to use a cliche here and say like go from caterpillar to butterfly, like when she got there, because she lands in Cuba and like she's like, I feel like an outsider. I always thought I would feel like I was home. And then as she's there longer and longer, she realizes that, kind of like what Lauren said, that like, yeah, she is Cuban, and she starts to realize how much of her heritage came with her to Miami, and even learning more about her heritage than in Cuba with her family's close friends and the people that were there. And it was just really cool to see that part of the story.
Right. Yeah, I definitely related with that, especially when she was in Cuba and she said that she felt like people were judging her because she was Cuban American and stuff like that. Like, I always feel that way when people are like, oh, you're from Brazil, and it's like, oh, but you're not really because you live in America. And I was like, well, yeah, but like Lauren mentioned, like my family has always been very, like, my mom doesn't want us to lose that, and so only speaking in Portuguese and all that stuff, and definitely helps not feel that way sometimes. So my question for you guys were for the twists in the book, or the surprises, and if you guys figured it out earlier, or if you knew or figured that was coming, or if you were genuinely surprised by the twist. And I meant, like, one, that she was pregnant, or that you thought she would be pregnant, and two, if you thought Pablo actually really died, or did you figure like he would be alive and she would meet him, like she did, obviously.
So I'll start on that one. So for the first one, I had an inkling that she might be pregnant, but...
Well, I guess not pregnant, but like that... I guess it would be Marisol's dad was actually...
Pablo's son.
Right.
So no, that was actually a decent twist.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's okay. No, that's a different question, so I'm glad you did. No, that was actually a decent twist. I mean, I had my suspicions, based on the timing of some of this stuff, but I didn't really like it. It's not like some predictions where you're like, oh, yep, I know it. That's what it is. Like that didn't happen. Like, it was still surprising to read. Like when it's like, oh, the confirmation. It's like, oh wow, that is okay. That's what happened. Okay, cool. So yeah, that one did get me. As far as him being alive, that was a bigger twist. I did not think he was alive. I was actually pretty sure he was dead.
Really?
I didn't either.
The author did a good job at did a good job at having Pablo cover up his own death. Yeah, I really did. I thought he was dead. That was a nice surprise at the end to find out that he was actually alive, and then for Marisol to get to meet him and was cool. What about you, Lauren?
I did not see either of them. But I also wasn't, I'm being honest, like, I wasn't super engaged with this book like I have been other books, so I wasn't, like, using my detective reading skills or brain. I was just kind of, like, mindlessly reading, if that makes sense. So I was just along for the ride. I feel like I wondered if something like her being pregnant would be the case, but it wasn't like I was like, oh my gosh, yes, this is 100% what's happening. And I definitely didn't think that he was alive, because I was very angry about the whole, when I found out that he was alive, like, even though I understand that it was, what he thought was for the best. I was mad that, he didn't make
Or
more
you inadvertently created a perfect segue into the next question.
Good.
But Barbara hasn't talked about whether she knew the
No,
about. No, sorry. No, go ahead. You need to talk
She
about.
had a perfect segue. Let's segue.
You need to answer.
Use your little segue.
You need to answer your own question. So
I thought it was predictable on both.
You thought so? Okay.
Yeah, I did. I figured.
I'm smarter than all of us.
I had my thinking cap on the whole time, but I can't shut that off. But I thought I figured when she got pregnant and stuff like that, I was like, well, the kid is obviously not her other husband's. Like, she probably told him, or he might not know. I don't remember if the grandpa, I'm assuming the grandpa knew, it's called math, that it wasn't his child. So I figured that off as soon as she was, I figured that would happen if she did have a kid. I was like, well, Marisol's probably Pablo's grandchild, and not who she thinks it is. And then I thought it would be too predictable if he died. So I was like, he's probably secretly alive. But I thought the way it happened, I didn't think that's the way it happened. I thought that he would have gotten in trouble, and Fidel Castro didn't let him and all this stuff, which wasn't the case. It was more her dad that was like, nah, dude, back off. This is, you're not good enough for my daughter, and she's married now, type thing. So I didn't see that aspect, but I didn't think he was dead.
If you really love someone, are you going to let that stand in between you and pursuing that?
I feel like the reason why he didn't pursue it was because she was already married, and he thought that he would be ruining that relationship, and maybe even, back then it wasn't back then you couldn't get pregnant outside of wedlock, so then I feel like she would have been shamed as well, and I feel like he saw that and didn't want to cause any more issues with her.
I get that, just don't like it.
So, inadvertently again,
oh boy,
you both segued into the next question I had, which is that sacrifice is a huge theme in this book.
Tell us more.
Lots of the characters make sacrifices, and the one that you just talked about was one of the big ones. That when we find out that Pablo is alive and that he came back and tried to to reconnect with her, and then chose to go back to Cuba after talking to her dad and seeing her and figuring out what her life was then, and that was obviously a huge sacrifice on his part. There are other sacrifices in the book too. Marisol made sacrifices. Louise made more sacrifices than Marisol did, probably, in the sense that
Marisol did shit. Sorry, she didn't.
What sacrifice
she did make a lot.
did Marisol?
Yeah, what the hell did she do? Nothing.
I guess not a lot. Louise sacrificed quite a bit.
I was gonna say Marisol did crap. No offense, she didn't sacrifice.
It seems
much.
In this novel the men made all the stuff.
No, that's not true. Elisa
no,
did.
Elisa did. She it was a huge sacrifice actually. I guess you could say she was willing to make a huge sacrifice because she wanted to be with Pablo, even though at that time in society in Cuba it would not have been appropriate for her to have a romantic relationship with someone like him.
Right.
Well,
so she was ready to make that sacrifice.
Yeah, and
she sacrificed relationships with her family too.
Yep.
And
lest we forget Beatrice.
Right.
Beatrice. She was my favorite. Man, I loved her character. Apparently, the other book is about her, and I really want to read that one because Beatrice was my favorite character personally. Anyways.
The other sacrifice that I forgot to mention was Elisa's husband.
Oh yeah.
It's
do you think he knew?
I do.
Obviously,
I do.
Right?
It's implied. They never directly say it, but I think it's implied. And like Barbara said, like the math. It's implied that he knew, and it's like he loved her enough, even if it wasn't like romantic, ooh, whoa, throw me off my feet or all that stuff. But he loved her enough that he saw what was going on, and she needed help. And because like Barbara said, like it wasn't okay at that time, or it was severely frowned upon to have children outside of wedlock, and he didn't want her to be in that situation, and he loved her enough to come in and help.
I feel like that's more of a realistic love story because that's how love is. It's not this perfect fall in love and fairy tale type thing. It's what she had with. Do we remember Grandpa's name? Was Grandpa?
I don't remember
if
the
they even
grandpa's
mentioned
name.
his name.
Or
I think
maybe
that they did.
Grandpa was just really dense and couldn't do math.
No, I think it was like they didn't say it outright, but I'm pretty sure it was like.
I
think he knew.
Devil's advocate.
Oh, I know. And then the sacrifices that Louise made as well. When he was obviously a revolutionary as well, of a different era. And I think the biggest sacrifice that Louise kind of had to make was leaving his country.
Yeah, his love for his country was very apparent.
He made it very clear in multiple times, because she kind of had little conversations with him about like if he would ever leave, and he made it very clear like this is where he was going to be. Mm-hmm. He didn't think that he could enact change from afar. Like he needed to be like on the ground and at the front line helping. And after what ended up happening, where he got arrested and pretty
much the government said you need to stop doing what you're doing or we're gonna murder you.
Well, I think the government was going to murder him if Pablo hadn't gotten him out of that situation and given him enough of a window to escape. I mean, it was to a point where escape and leaving Cuba was his only option. But they
definitely would have.
The author did a really good job at, I guess, at a third love story, which was between Louise and Cuba.
Well, and Pablo too.
And Pablo in Cuba, like you could the way that she wrote how he talked about his country, like you could really feel that loss when he did have to leave. Like he really, it hurt, and I think that it hurt Marisol on some level too, because she knew that at some level all of this is kind of her fault.
How?
Him having to leave, like the reason he got arrested was. Didn't he get her? He got arrested with her.
No, sure, but he got caught before her. It
True.
just flagged worse because she was an American person, and they're like, "Oh crap! Like he's working with the Americans, better get him." But he started that by posting those things. It caught their eye quicker because of her.
Yeah.
It's not all entirely her fault.
But I think she felt guilty taking him away from his country.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't think he would ever be happy with her and she even, in the book, she even said that. She was like, I worry that he's never going to be happy with me because of that.
Do you think that if all of that hadn't gone down, that she would have chosen to return to America, or if she would have chosen to stay in Cuba?
I think she would have returned, personally.
That's a good question. The way that it was written, it certainly was, it seemed like she was leading the other direction, like thinking about just staying, but I think that was intentional though, and so I think it was the author's intention to have like her become like this romanticized Cuba that she's like, oh, I'm home, I love this place, it's my home country, I want to stay here, and then that hard cut to the harsh reality of what Cuba is, that kind of shocked her out of that. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
I thought that whole thing was very well written. Like it was the hard cut between like all like the nice times of Cuba and like the romanticizing of it that she had done in her time with Louise when they were enjoying themselves, and
even hearing it from her grandma,
and hearing all the stories.
Her grandma's not going to say the crappy parts of what was going on in Cuba.
Like that was a really, really well written part where it took that hard turn, and it was like a very big shock for her. But
that's why I don't think she would stay in Cuba because of that. Like,
no, and
realistically, it's one thing to visit a place, and it's another to call a place home.
True. That's true. What do you think, Lauren?
I don't know. After I was finished with it, I was just thinking about if he wouldn't have gotten arrested and they wouldn't have like been in that situation, if she would have wanted to stay there with the people that like the family and the culture, since she was so kind of enamored with all of it while she was there, or if she would go back. I honestly didn't really know one way or another. I think that I feel like if it hadn't gone down like it did, if Louise stayed, I feel like she was going to stay because She was in love with him after a couple weeks.
That's the one thing I could not predict and I could not figure out was how she was going to end the book. Because I was like, because I was dead set in saying he would never leave Cuba and she would not stay for him. So I was like, how is this romantic whirlwind relationship is going to end? And then she threw in the whole, like, government, he's going to get murdered type thing. And I was like, okay.
You
So
didn't think she would stay for him?
No. No. I feel like she would try, and then she couldn't work there. What she was doing as a job, a freelance writer. Well, I don't know if she was a freelance writer, but she was a writer. That's not a thing down there. Like it's a privilege here to be able to write like that, and she wouldn't have that down there because the government is so controlling in what people write. So she wouldn't have that option. So I just don't know that she would be able, because she said that that's the one thing she loved doing was her job. Even her family hated that she did it. They didn't consider it like a real, what is the word I'm looking for here? A real career. Yeah. And she was like, well, screw you guys. Like, this is what I love doing. I just feel it's the same thing with Luis and how he felt about Cuba. I feel that's how she felt about her work. And so I don't think in either case, I just don't think they would be happy. Like, she wouldn't be happy there in the long run, and I don't think he's going to be happy in America in the long run. But
another amazing segue to another question. So and we're actually kind of skipping around, which is great. It's good. So Pablo and Elisa had very different views on what to do when the Cuban Revolution started to happen. So Pablo's perspective was that he needed to stay there, and the only way to change things and fix Cuba was to stay there and fight and fix it. And Elisa's family took the exact opposite perspective in that they can't support this regime. It's not going the direction that they want to, and so they chose to leave and live in exile. And so the question that I wanted to ask is, which of those sides do you support, or do you most identify with? So and I'm not asking like it's like, oh, are you pro like communism or anything like that? I'm asking like in a situation like that. I mean, are you
communism? You know,
I don't know. I just want to talk about that, like the stay and fight versus pack and leave.
I don't think that Elisa and her family had a choice. Like, they were on the chopping block because I mean her dad pretty much got in trouble, and the only reason why he got out was wasn't it because of Pablo? Like, because and vice versa too. Like, he was, because the dad was rubbing elbows with the old
president.
And so Fidel was going through and going down the list and being like, okay, well, if you had any ties with this man, like, you're literally dead to me, and I shall murder you and your family, because he didn't want anyone thinking like, oh, like, let me just rub elbows with you and we're going to be fine. I mean, essentially, her family would either stay there and run the risk of getting murdered by his people or something like that, or leaving. I don't think they had a choice in the matter. I don't think they were like, oh, we're going to stay here. And the people who did end up staying, like her best friend stayed, and the government went and took the rum business from her family. Yeah. And then they turned into like being high society to being pretty much normal with everyone else, and AKA you don't have anything either. So yeah. I don't think they had a choice in that matter. So I don't know if I would say that was a choice. It was either you're choosing life or death at that point. And most people are going to be like, oh, you know what? I think I'm going to try to survive somewhere else instead of running the risk of having my family get murdered.
That's true. And I think that the family part of that speaks to probably why her dad made the decision that he made. Because even if he had been, passionate about staying and fighting for his land and his things that he earned over time and fighting for his country, it's a very different decision to make when you're a father of 4 children, right?
Yes.
4 children.
5, technically.
5 children.
The brother dies.
That's right, the brother, yeah.
That 5. Man, gut-wrenching scene. I thought that was very well done. That particular thing personally. Anyways, go on.
It's a different decision when you're making it for your family versus Pablo, who was making it like as a young man who really only had himself to think about and his country. But and I guess and Elisa on some
Do you
level.
think if he knew if he didn't know that she was pregnant, like he didn't even know he had a son. So do you think if he knew that he would change his mind because he would actually have like something to take care of? Like it's not like he can literally throw his life away if he gets murdered. You know, it's just him.
I don't know. I think I don't know. That would have been an interesting dilemma to put him in, the character in. I think that it probably would have still been a hard decision for him. I don't think it would have been, an easy, like, I'm part of the revolution, let's do this. I think it would have been harder because you could tell in the way his character was written that, he was very passionate about the things that he believed in and very passionate about the things that, Castro and those guys originally stood for. But I think it would have been a lot harder to make that decision if he knew that the love of his life was pregnant and knew that she was leaving. Like, I think that would be...
I mean, I think he genuinely thought Castro was going to change things for the better.
They all did.
Right, because, I mean, I think that in the book he even said, like, in the beginning, like, he was a good person, or, like, his views and stuff like that. He literally shared the same views, because I'm pretty sure he was buddy-buddy with Castro and stuff like that, and then he said... he saw how he was turning into the same person he replaced, and so Pablo even left like that little community of fighters and whatever you want to call them, I don't know, and didn't want to be a part of that anymore because he didn't agree with it anymore. And I also have to take back what I said. Since he didn't know that she was pregnant, there's no way of him going to the dad and being like, oh, JK, I don't want to ruin her place in society, because he didn't realize she was pregnant. So that wasn't why he left her be and didn't pursue her again back in America. So
actually, I mean, at that point, it solidified his thoughts that he didn't want to disrupt her life, because he thought not only is she married, but she has a kid with this guy.
No, but did he know that she was, like, she had a kid with that guy?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. Just ignore everything I just said.
Lauren, do you have any other thoughts on that one?
Not particularly, other than just like what Barbara said about the fact that I feel like they didn't really have a choice. And I think that a lot of people, when you're faced with safety and security versus, something that's unknown, people tend to lean more towards the safety and security, especially like you said, when there's family involved.
I mean, I thought it was a cool side view or perspective that the author did of Luisa's ex-wife, and I forget her name, because at one point her mom and dad shipped her off on a boat from Cuba, trying to have her go to Florida because it was like they felt it was that bad, and they were that desperate to get their daughter out, and they got caught. She got shipped back, like they did back then. And her parents died because of that, if I'm not mistaken. They murdered her parents because they wanted a better life for her child. So it just goes to show you, like, how desperate people are for a better life and stuff like that for their kids if they don't feel safe in where they're living. So I thought that was a really cool perspective that she threw in there, personally. Michael, is that a segue for something?
No, actually, that's not a segue for anything. Just a nice way to wrap up that question. The last question that I wanted to go over is that at one point in the book, Pablo tells Elisa, when they're arguing, that everything is political. And I was curious, do you guys agree or disagree with that statement?
You're the political guy. What do you think?
And why don't you go first on this one?
That's fine. So Pablo says everything is political, and I think that in his worldview at that time, everything is, because he's looking at a Cuba that is completely, controlled by this oligarchy that's been set up where, the president's in power, and the president has given other people power, and the people he's given power are his buddies, and those are the guys with all the wealth, and all the business and commerce and the economy is all resting on them. I mean, so from his perspective, everything is political. That there isn't anything that he sees that's not affected by politics. And so that, I think that when he said it, he believes it. I don't know if I agree with that statement just as like is everything political? If that's what you were asking me, I don't think that everything is. I think a lot of things are. But I think from the book's perspective, that's why he said that, is that, he feels like the politics in Cuba at the time are touching every aspect of his life, and primarily in negative ways. And that's why he wants to change things.
I don't think everything's political, but what you said back maybe in his point of view and his time frame, like it felt like everything was, and maybe it was. I don't claim to sit here and know anything about politics, so I don't know, but I don't think everything is political. I don't think the world is so black and white like that.
I feel like that saying everything is political is kind of a sweeping statement, but at the same time, like a lot of like current times right now, like just when you read the news or you hear about like what's going on, like everything, even like education and just in general, so you can tie it back to some form of political something. So like politics, I feel like they have a hand in like everything in that sense, but I feel like saying that everything is strictly political isn't accurate. I don't know if that made any sense.
No, that makes sense.
No, just kidding. I always wanted to say that.
It made sense in my head.
No, that made sense. I was just kidding. I've always just wanted to be like, no.
So did either of you have any final thoughts that you want to talk about in the book before we move on to...
Except for Beatrice being a badass. Like, Beatrice loves her family to death. Like, she would literally do anything for her family. That was case in point with the twin brother that died, and that was kind of a crappy part in the book. But
and then, her becoming a CIA operative.
I know. She threw in that little tidbit, be like, in my next book, let's give a hint. And, like, threw it in there. I was like, oh.
I think Barbara's more excited for book 2 than she was for this one.
Yeah. As long as there's no... obviously, in the cover, it even said there was going to be romance about it. I'm like, I was hoping Beatrice didn't care about romance because she, like, was the never married aunt and, like, being single and all that jazz, but obviously there's going to have to be romance in it because why not?
Oh, yeah, it's just,
But, you have to... That's pretty cool. Like, she's literally making something that happened where, like, the U.S. government did try sending in people to murder him, and they failed miserably, and she threw that in as, like, a female, first off. A female was a part of that. They're like, that is so cool. Like, I'm very interested. More interested than this book, personally. So if anyone's read that, please let me know if you recommend it or not, because I would love to hear about it. That was my 2 cents anyways, Phil.
Any other final thoughts from you, Lauren?
I don't think so. I think we pretty much covered it all. Is the next book is the When We Left Cuba one, right?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think that's right. Let me look at the notes here real quick.
I believe it's just those two that...
yes, When We Left Cuba.
Yeah, and I'm curious, I don't think it's a sequel, it's just Beatrice's story. Yeah, like, same, like, mentioned same characters type thing, but I wonder if they'll continue, like, Marisol and Luis's story in that part or not.
That relationship is in shambles now.
Oh, it is. And, like, let's just talk about how immigration does not work the way that they said in the book, but I digress.
So, moving on to then the review section, we'll start with Barbara. Barbara, what was your score
I think I gave it
out
a
of 10?
6.75.
You did give it a 6.75, yeah.
Because I
just
feel
an
like...
oddly specific score.
I know. I just couldn't...
6.5-ish.
Right. It was a 6.5-ish, 7-ish. I really like the historical. I love historical books and stuff like that because I just feel like I'm learning while reading, and I just love that. That's my jam. So I love how she did that. I feel like she did a very good job at that. I loved the different perspective of the history, essentially. Like, we got the Cuban side of history, and we rarely get that. So I really like that. I guess she's saying, I don't know if every Cuban feels that way, but it was nice. I feel like we got different perspectives and stuff like that. I just could not get into the whole romance part of the romance. Marisol and Luis didn't really care much for that. I didn't mind Pablo and Elisa's romance. If that book was just about that, then that would have been fine for me. So I feel like if that was just that, I would have given it a 7, maybe even higher, because I liked all of that. But the other aspect really threw it kind of down for me. That's why it was a 6-ish, 6 or 6.5-ish, 7. So for mine was a 6.75, which I don't think we're legally technically allowed to give that, but it's whatever. It's my podcast. I can do what I want.
Lauren?
I mean, I feel bad with my ratings because I feel like there's like certain books that I just like really love, and so whenever I'm rating them, like those are what I'm comparing it to. And
Harry Potter, looking at you.
Yeah, Harry Potter, just like some of my favorite books, and so I'm like, well, when I look at it compared to these like books that are just like so close to my heart, I mean, I always give it lower ratings than I feel like it might deserve. So like I gave this one a 6, and the only reason that it didn't get a 7 is because of the romance between what's her face,
Marisol
and Luis.
Louis.
The only reason that it got as high as it did was purely because of the different perspectives. I liked the way that was written. Like, I liked the writing. And I liked the historical perspective. I felt like I learned something, like you said, Barbara. And yeah, that's I mean, maybe it should be higher, but I feel like the higher ratings are reserved for things that are like as good as my favorite books. And this was not one that I would like pick up and read again.
Fair enough. So I did give this one a 7. I chose to give it the little bit higher rating because of the historical stuff that I really enjoyed. But couldn't give it any higher of a 7 because of some of the romance aspects that I didn't like. But I did really enjoy the history stuff, especially learning things about history that I didn't learn before, and getting inspired to go and do more research. That's always
piqued your interest.
It's always interesting. So I gave it a 7 out of 10, which made our group score 6.5 because of Barbara's 6.75 rating. We're now rating on the decimal system. So
you never said I couldn't.
The one person that was least looking forward to reading it rated it the highest.
I know. Can I just point out our rating is very consistent. Like, Lauren is very harsh as a teacher. I feel like normally should be. Michael is more forgiving on stuff, and I'm in the very dead set in the middle this whole time. Like, my score has been always closest to the middle between both of you guys, and
That's
Michael's always been more generous with his scores, and Lauren is like, nah.
I'm very you're right. I'm a very harsh critic, I guess. But I also like, I don't know. I did literature for like my whole undergrad, and so it's hard not to be.
So I had the same mentality going in, like, compared to Harry Potter or my other favorite books and stuff like that, like I would have given this a 4 or something like that. But I was like, I can't do that. I have to take myself out of that because nothing's ever, well, I shouldn't say nothing, maybe something, but like things aren't going to compare to that. So I feel like I shouldn't be so judgy in that sense. And that's why I was struggling between the 6.5 and the 7 for this book, because I've read crappier books. Like, trust me, there are some books where I was like, what the heck? Like, this was...
In a dark, dark wood?
Yes. And even then, like, I still, like, I don't think I could ever be like, in a dark wood, you just deserve a 1. Like, I could never grade.
I could
unless
give it a
it's
1.
Trash. Unless
It
it's
was
complete
not
and utter trash. I could not ever rate any book that low because I just love reading, you know, and even if it's maybe not my jam, maybe it's someone else's, so I would hate to, like, discourage anyone from reading anything because I personally don't like it doesn't mean someone else won't. The only stuff I'm saying is complete and utter trash. Maybe I won't even mention it, but it's just complete and utter trash, and I'm pretty sure y'all know what I'm talking about. That's what I would low, really low, was just crap book. Like, why was this written type thing. But even in a dark wood, I would probably not give it that low of a score. Even in
You're right. I'd give it a 3.
Like it.
No, I'm just kidding. So our group score of this one was 6.5 out of 10. But take that with a grain of salt because all 3 of us said we would recommend it. So we all enjoyed it enough to say that we would recommend it to friends and family in our lives. I want to take a moment to thank all of you who are still listening for listening. We really appreciate it. We are Badass Literature Society. Hopefully you like this episode. If not, please let us know. If you have a book recommendation, let us know.
I hate the way you say that. If you don't like it, let us know. Just let us know, regardless if you like it or not. Just please review us. Let us know. Give us feedback. On iTunes, the more you guys review, the more people find out about us. So
it's true.
Really appreciate. This is me begging now. We really appreciate those reviews and stuff like that. And thank you, Carly. And I was gonna give a shout out to the other person who reviewed us, and now I forgot.
Well, we can do that next time.
This is embarrassing.
Follow us on our socials. Our handle is @BadassLitPod. Here's the reminder. Next month, we're going to be reading Magic for Liars by Sarah Gailey. And if you want to check our Twitter feed in the near future, I will post a link there so you guys can check out the book and pick it up if you want to read it before we get to the podcast.
Read with us so we can discuss. We want more discussion.
Exactly.
Tell us you hate us like Michael said.
Yes, tell us you hate us. Until next time, we are Badass Literature Society.
Michael, this is Barbara.
This is Michael.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye, guys.